They cut the last of the white roses from the hedges in the gold sheen before dawn, when dew jeweled each petal, and the bees were too slow to sting. Marguerite walked the path between beds, the hem of her gown dark with wet, and listened to the garden breathe. No place in the world smelled like the Reach at first light. Bruised mint and sun-warmed earth, crushed thyme underfoot, roses so sweet they made the tongue ache. She wanted to fill her lungs and not think about banners or princes, or the hard, cold clatter of a crown set on the wrong head. A thrush flickered from hedge to hedge. Somewhere behind, a page coughed, trying to be invisible as he trailed at a respectful distance, with a parasol and a letter sealed with dark red wax. When she reached the arbor of old Grenwood, where the vines had blackened and thickened into knotted fingers over a lifetime, she sat, and the page came forward, bowed, and held out the thing that shone like a drop of blood in his hand. The seal was a lion's head, proud as ever. Clever hands had traced old friend in tiny script in the corner. Pettier Baelish's hand, neat as pins, smiling even from ink. "Let him wait," she said. The page blinked, unsure if she meant the letter or the man. It was both. Let him wait in the cool of the stone hall where her grandmother liked to sit. Let the wax hold fast a little longer. Her grandmother found her there anyway. Olenna Redwine moved like a small storm in layered wools and silks, the color of wheat and sage. She carried a cluster of rosemary in one hand, as if it were a scepter. "You'll take root if you sit there any longer," she said, and settled without asking, the bench creaking under the weight of her will. "Or do you mean to become a shrub and hide as your father did whenever the steward counted casks?" Marguerite smiled despite herself, then let the smile fade. "Have you read it?" "No. Letters that call themselves friendly require the strongest wine. I thought to drink first." Olenna's eyes flicked to the page. "Go roast in the shade until we need you," she said, and the boy scurried. She took the letter, turned it in her fingers as a woman turns a fruit to test its ripeness, broke the lion seal, and read in small, snorting breaths. She said at last. Littlefinger thinks we'll be flattered to be useful. He thinks we are hungry to be needed in King's Landing. He thinks Lord Tywin is less stubborn than a mule with gold shoes. It's a feast of thinking." Olenna refolded the page with neat, biting gestures. "He says Joffrey requires a rose upon his arm before the city breaks into panic. He says the small folk are rioting. He says the queen is a bundle of nerves wrapped in brocade. He paints the boy king as a prize stallion who needs a light hand. He does not mention the boy's teeth." Then Miss House. Marguerite felt the garden tilt under the weight of those words. She remembered the rumor passing mouth to mouth in Renly's camp at Bitterbridge like stolen bread, that Joffrey Baratheon was not Baratheon at all. Stannis' letter had flown before the wind, nailed to sept doors and tied to crow's legs, a thing of outrage and black ink. She remembered Renly laughing it off by firelight, the gold gleam of his beard, the green silk of his doublet, the way the tent poles hummed in a late-night wind. Renly said he could make laughter into law, Olenna snapped. Unkind only because she had outlived all the men who promised her certainty. She softened in the next heartbeat. If this joyless letter is true, the boy is a lion's cub. If it is false, he is a stag too proud for a handler. Either way, he is not my choice for your hand. Not yet. And if he were neither, Marguerite said, tasting the words like a dangerous fruit she could not help but bite. If he were only a boy with a crown and a mother and a court that prays to him, as though a prayer were a chain. Olenna's laugh was not a laugh exactly. "My pearl, you are not here to be soft on strays. Your kindness is a weapon. Guard its edge." She lifted the letter and rapped Marguerite's knuckles lightly. "He wants us to bring all the gardeners to water a tree planted in stone." "And your brother?" "Hasn't slept," Marguerite said, the ache of Loras' grief moving through her like a bruise. "He walks the yards before dawn. He rides before the gates after supper. He speaks of Stannis as if the sound of the name could set his sword afire. He is a burning house looking for a breeze." Then Nicole. "We are the breeze," Olenna said with brisk cruelty, because truth was a surgeon's knife. and we'll decide where he blazes. Come, she added, standing. If I must drink with Littlefinger's words in my mouth, I prefer to do it sitting down. They went inside, the sudden cool of stone swallowing the garden's moist breath. The hall at Bitterbridge was old as the vines, its tapestries apples and hunts, its windows slotted and generous by turns. When they reached the dais, Olenna clapped, and the servants knew to bring wine, the dark sour sort from the arbor that tasted of bread and berries. Margaery watched it shine as it poured. "Read it aloud," Olenna said to the air, and Margaery obeyed. Each syllable made Baelish's voice move like an eel between the benches. He was too polite by half, too eager to be seen as helpful, offering terms in the tone of a man offering advice on what color ribbon suited a gown. The gist lay slack as a net. Bring your strength, bring your banners, bring your smile. The boy will make you queen. When she set the page down, Margaery felt the weight of her own silence. She put 2 fingers on the smooth wood of the table and drew a slow circle, a ritual no one had taught her, only something she had discovered near the end of childhood to pin herself in place. "No," she said. The word went through her like cold water. She said it again. "No." Olenna's mouth did something like a smile. "Ah. Say it once more, and the gods will think it a charm." "Done?" "No," Margaery said, almost laughing. And the laugh broke on the memory of Renly's sudden empty bed, the green tents collapsing, the torchlight and the screaming. Not while the ink of Stannis' letters is yet wet on the doors. Not while Loras dreams of vengeance. Not while I must learn how to wear another man's name without bruising. Not when the boy is what he is. If he is a stag, he is a cruel one. If he is a lion, he is a cub with a taste for claws. I will not step from one storm into another because a cell song says the second storm is fashionable. Then Bamo. Good, Olenna said simply. We delay. We ask for proofs no one can give. We insist upon courtesies that cannot be paid. We will send words wrapped in roses and thorns. She plucked a sprig of rosemary and crushed it under her thumb. The smell lifted sharp and clean. We keep our host where our bread grows. Let Tywin Lannister come to us with gold in both hands. Let him sweat. Loras will not like it. Loras does not like breathing lately. He will do it anyway, Olenna said, and then turned her head toward the sound of boots. He came in with dust in his hair from the morning yards, the white cloak over one arm, his mouth a line drawn with a hard pen. He was so young and so bright, and grief had shaken that brightness as wind shakes a silver leaf. He kissed his sister's brow, his grandmother's cheek. He drank from the cup set for him as if the wine could quench something fire had left behind. What says the fox, he asked. That we are needed to keep the capital from eating itself, Olenna said. To which I reply, poor cooks, poor meat. Loras's jaw made a soundless answer. We march east, he said. We cannot sit in the gardens while Stannis brings his ships. We march to Tumbleton, Olenna said. We feed our men. We gather lordlings and their fathers' levies who love the smell of your hair. And we sit. And we see whether Lannister gold can ride as fast as Stannis oars. If the city holds, it holds without us. If it does not, we will not have fed our host to a pyre to decorate another man's feast. To wait, Loras said, sour as brine. Waiting. We have waited for fruit before, Olenna said. It ripens only once. Why bruise it hurrying it to the table? She set down Baelish's letter and slid it toward him. Your sister has refused Joffrey. She will not wed him at a shout from the walls. We will not marry our name to a rumor and a temper. Something in Loras' face broke and showed the boy under the night. Love of his sister, love of his dead king, hatred of the man he blamed. All ran raw as rainwater. It is good, he said at last. And then, because he was honest and young, it is hard. He lifted the letter. Littlefinger never asks for one thing. He is a hive. There's honey here and stings besides. Then wear your gauntlets. Olenna murmured. We will answer him. We will say, we mourn. We must pray. We must reconcile our banners. We will require assurances of the kings. Temperament. We must consult with our liege lord. We must taste the wind." She smiled like a knife put away. Safe for now. Meanwhile, we marched to Tumbleton. Slow as a sermon. Then sow. After, when the council had met, and each lord had chewed the same stale loaf of caution and pride, when the scribes had scratched out the polite refusals, and the riders had gone with packets tied under their cloaks, Marjorie went back to the gardens. She set a hand to the rough bark of the old vine and thought of vows. In some part of herself she had been wed to Renly, even when she was not. In some part, she had been wed to the idea of being a queen whose smile steadied rooms. That part of her had not died in the Green Night. It had grown teeth. It could wait. That was power too. The Tyrell host moved when the sun rose to thin milk and stayed all day on the edge of the hills, like a sea reluctant to flood a plain. Tents went up and came down. Cook fires burned. Song rose from throats that needed to believe in a future that contained hot bread. Loras rode the lines in the evening, wearing grief like a spotless cloak. He remembered faces. Marjorie saw him do it. The little turn of the mouth when he recognized a banner, a squire, an old man half fallen from his saddle, and gave back courage in the coin of attention. The knights loved him for it, and the boys loved him more. Between orders, she found him one night near the pickets, where the horses breathed the chill like men smoking. He leaned against a rail, looking at nothing she could see. The stars were spilled milk. "Do you hate me for it?" she asked. "For what?" He did not turn, which saved them both from being brave. For saying no. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I hate a shadow on a wall, not you. I hate a voice that made the candles shiver. I hate that men make war into a thing a woman must shoulder to keep them from ruining the bread." He turned then, and she saw his mouth soften. "You always were fiercer than you look. I always looked like a rose," she said. "Roses are knives with perfume." He reached and squeezed her fingers. "I will cut what you point at, sister. Point with your head," she said gently. "Not with your hurt." She slept late for the first time since the green tent collapsed and dreamed of smooth water with birds walking upon it. She woke to the slow thunder of wheels and thought, chain. She had not known then. She would know later. On the roads that led east to the city, other wheels had begun to turn. In King's Landing, the summer light pooled like oil in the alleys, catching at brick and blade. The river stank with fish and shit and secrets. Tyrion Lannister woke with a pain in his hip from sleeping in the chair again, and a feeling that the day had rolled him in its teeth and would do so again. He washed in water that smelled faintly of iron and red hands. He ate half a pear and a crust because eating reminded him that he was a creature and not a chess piece fashioned of brass and jokes. He put on the hands chain, which looked well on him and felt like a manacle. He found Bronn in the gallery plucking his teeth with a sliver of wood. "How many?" Tyrion asked without greeting. "How many what?" Bronn said. He flicked the sliver, and unerringly, it struck a spiderweb and clung. "Barrels. Faith. Rats. Take your pick." "Barrels enough to float a prince," Bronn said. "If the prince were made of tar and bad ideas. Faith enough to make the Septons sweat." He flashed teeth. Not much of that last one, truth told. Tyrion hummed in his throat. "The alchemists grow more cheerful by the day," he said. "I find it unsettling." "They're going to get their green wish," Bronn said. "You sure, imp?" "Certain?" "No. I am certain of very few things. One is that my sister will drown me in wine if I say the wrong word. The other is that men die well when they feel the shape of the ground under them. If we cannot have knights, we can have ground. If we cannot have bread, we can have chains." "Done?" "The big one's nearly done," Bronn said, meaning the thing that had been a whisper in the forges, the length of iron that would make the river mouth into a trap. Tyrion imagined it waking at the bottom of the black water like a serpent. He went to the walls and saw the city with new eyes each day. It was not a place, but 1,000 small hungers sharing bricks. Fishwives beat a man who had stolen a red onion from their basket. A boy with a goat sang a filthily inventive song about Stannis' ears. Varys joined Tyrion at the Crenels. smelling of powder and violets. "You look tired," Varys said, sympathetic as a pillow. "I look like a man counting teeth to buy time," Tyrion said. "Tell me something useful." "The Tyrells have replied," Varys said, "with roses that have needles. Regret, delay, sorrow. Pleas for patience. They sit their host along the rose-rod and look toward us like a suitor who promises that he admires but keeps polishing his boots." "Why?" Tyrion demanded, though he had his guesses. "They insisted on us as if we were a gold cup. Baelish wrote that they would drink quickly. End. Lady Margaery is a person and not a treaty," Varys said wistfully, as if he had once been capable of wanting to be seen as such. "Her grandmother is iron that has learned to smile. They have heard tales about our boy. They have read the letters with the incest as ink. If the city falls, they will want to be clean. If it holds, they will come with perfumes and be welcomed for their tardiness, because that is how the world turns for those who grow wheat." "Seven hells," Tyrion said softly. He pictured Stannis' ships turning the mouth of the river into a moving forest. He saw men with ropes at their throats tugging at oars with their last strength. He saw wildfire burning like noon-made flesh. He had wanted the Tyrells to come, and he had not wanted them at all. Set a rose beside a lion, and you had two throats to worry about. "Does my father know?" "He knows the sound of coin and caution, yes," Varys said. "He writes to everyone. He is a letter grown into a man. But he is far. And we are here." Then Cersei wore a gown sewn with small golden lions that winked like eyes when she turned. She had slept little. The color at her cheekbones was wine and paint. She summoned Sansa Stark with the same voice she used to summon Silverhand to play in the afternoons. "Come," she said. And it was an order dressed as a caress. "Stand here. The light flatters you." Sansa had learned how to feel nothing while the city felt everything. She held her hands moored at her waist and watched the light make a bright ghost of her hair. Cersei made a small sound, pleasure or dismissal, and let her gaze drift toward the window where the dust wrote its own histories. "They say Lord Stannis eats his meals at the same hour each day," Cersei murmured. "They say he sits upon a carved chair when he does it, and that he sharpens his knife before each bite. What kind of man sharpens his knife to eat bread, do you think?" Sansa thought of her father cleaning his sword in quiet, of Lady's fur, of Arya's snarling laughter. She thought of a man who made rooms cold. A careful man. She said, speaking into the etiquette of the air. "A humorless one," Cersei countered. "Do you know what humor is worth?" She turned, her eyes torch bright. "It keeps men from tearing the meat off their own hands when they get bored." "I have never torn meat from my hands," Sansa said in that same artless tone that had become her armor. "Not yet," Cersei said, and smiled the way a cliff smiles at a wave. "Tell me what you pray for." Sansa swallowed. "Peace," she said in thought. "For the door to my room to lock from the inside when I wish it. For the hound to forget my name. For my father's head to stop appearing in dreams and looking at me with scorn for living. For the realm. The realm is a beast," Cersei said. "It eats daughters." She looked at Sansa with that needle gaze that saw nothing and everything. "The Tyrell girl plays a gentle game. She's pretty in the way that makes men polite. She does not want my son, or she wants him slow." Cersei's mouth went thin. "She thinks she can time a storm." Sansa thought of storms in the north that had been not events but seasons, long as a child's memory. "Sometimes that is all anyone can do," she said softly. "Watch the cloud and wait." At night, the city felt like a single chest that breathed too fast. The storm that was not a storm yet made the lamps lean. The hound stood under a torch in the Red Keep's yard and watched its converted sunlight lick the stones. He listened to the cough of armor and the whicker of a horse that wanted a quieter stable. He did not drink, because he had tried that and found only hell. He stared at the fire until it stared back, and then he turned away, and in the turning found the girl from the north, staring at him like a doe at a hound that had lost interest in deer. "Girl," he said. "My lord," she said, because she had learned that a low title could soothe a higher pride. "You sing," he said, as if accusing her of theft. "Sometimes. Sing to me when the ships come." Sandor said, and when she flinched the very slightest, he said, "Not to make me brave," and almost smiled. "To remind me what voices sound like that ain't screaming." She nodded. He moved away, as if motion were something learned late in life. Awkward and painful at first, and then useful. On the Blackwater, the tide turned, drawing its skirts downriver. Davos Seaworth watched the flow from the stern of Black Betha, and counted without meaning to. The time between eddies, the pop of tar as the pitch caulking flexed, the patience in men's faces. He had been a smuggler, and he had been a knight, and he was still mostly a man who understood how much weight a rope could bear before it snapped. Stannis' fleet stretched like a spine of dark fish back toward the bay. The great ships at front bristling with rams, the galleys massed and ready to bite. Sails were furled, oars flexed like muscle. Above them, the sky had that scoured, endless look the sea wore, when it had had its way with everything below it. Mathos, his son, came up with ink on his fingers. He was always writing orders, always copying, as if the sea could be a paper that held still for his pen. "The king is resolved," he said. "We will take the city before Lord Tywin can bring relief." "Good," Davos said, because it was the thing one said. He rubbed his thumb against the splintered rail. "Lord Tyrell?" "Not yet," Mathos said. A slight smile, a little contempt. "After Renly, they find their courage goes lame. The Lady Margaery finds the pace not to her taste, I hear." "Danderau. She's a girl who grew up with bread and bees," Davos said mildly. "King's Landing smells of neither." He watched a gull beat its wings over the bow and drift to rest on the ram of a ship ahead. Men have noses. So do lords in their way. They can smell when something's gone bad. "Rot or not, the city is ours," Mathos said, all the surety of youth lined up behind the words. "The gods have sorted the matter. Raw lore." "Leave him to his red women," Davos said too quickly. Then, softer. "The night is dark. We had a candle once. It burned green and did what it did." He had not wanted to bring Melisandre near this water. Fire on water made the skin of his hands itch, and his mouth fill with old nick metal tastes. "The rest is oars and iron. They say the boy king commands," Mathos added, a little relish, not because he loved Joffrey but because he loved the story of fate that made men get what they deserve. "They say he will be on the walls." "Boys fall," Davos said. The wind shifted. He felt it in his teeth. "Men burn." He did not mean to say it aloud. His son glanced at him as if he had named somebody's mother in a tavern. At Tumbleton, the Tyrell host settled like grain in a wide pan. The town's low walls had always been more market than fortress. Now stalls vanished, and boards rose, and men hammered, and nails sang. The lords of the Reach were peacocks in steel. Between their tents, Margaery walked, and learned what it was to be bowed to not as a sister or a granddaughter, but as a standard in flesh. Men told her little stories they wanted her to carry back like ribbons. The names of horses, the names of sons, the manner in which a boar had died last winter, the way a field had recovered. She gave those stories to Olenna later, and her grandmother stored them away like seeds. One afternoon, as she stood with a group of wives who had ridden thus far to bring blankets and sweet cakes, and to touch a piece of what their husbands believed in, a woman with cracked hands and beautiful eyes pushed to the front and curtsied awkwardly. "Begging your leave, lady," she said. "My boy's lost." He ran with others, wild with talk of banners. He was too young. "If you see..." Her eyes filled as if a bucket had been tipped. "If you see boys with our colors who cannot hold a spear without trembling, send them home. If you can." "I will try," Margaery said. The woman nodded as if that were a promise she could carry like bread. After she was gone, the wives murmured, And Marguerite stood with the smell of the woman's tears still in her head and thought, "Queen." The word had been addressed once. It was an oath now. Night at Tumbleton was loud, then quiet, then loud again as men tested songs against the dark. Loras came to her tent with his white cloak clean and his eyes dirtied by thinking. "There are ravens," he said. "The fleet weighed anchor." Marguerite looked at the candle flame and watched it lean in a draught. "Then the city is a bell," she said softly. "It will soon decide whether to ring or crack." At King's Landing they rang the bells too early and too often. They rang them in different voices, each bell insisting on its own story. The fat king tolling like a drunk, the mermaid of the Bailers sept chiming pure and sad, the little tin bell in Flea Bottom pleading without dignity. "They will ring them until the ropes snap," Tyrion said, and Varys said, "and then they will scream." The smell of pitch and fear rose like a sacrament. The chain went into the water at dusk behind a screen of barges and lies. Men cursed the weight. Men bled over it. The green hands of the alchemists glowed in the torchlight, as if souls had taken to standing closer than was wise. Tyrion walked the quay and spoke in his voice of small certainties. He spoke of barrels to be rolled out only at his word, of signals to be taken only from his hand. He spoke of the hound and the king's guard and the archers on the walls. He spoke of this bridge and that, and where to give ground with show, and where to be a cliff. He did not speak of the Tyrell host because an absence is not a plan. He had learned to leave the shape of it in the air like a saint's miracle. Sometimes the space a thing would occupy, if it existed, could hold men up for a while. Cersei gathered ladies in Maegor's holdfast and turned wine into a shield. Sansa sat among them and listened to talk thread itself into tapestries of wickedness and wish. Shae poured for her and smiled like a conspirator. Shae's hands smelled faintly of lilac soap. "You're shaking," Shae said, so low it was almost lips moving without a voice. "I'm cold," Sansa said. She was not cold. Her skin was too tight, as if someone had sewn it with false seams. "Sing to me when the walls begin," Cersei said, the words gliding over the bickering of ladies and the clink of goblets. She looked not at Sansa but through her, as if the girl's throat were a harp, and Cersei felt entitled to pluck it. "Sing something northern, something that sounds like trees breaking under snow." "I do not know that," Sansa said, and Cersei laughed, sudden and silvery, and said, "Of course you do." On Black Betha, Davos positioned his sons by habit and hope. He put fingers on rope and knew how it would feel in his palm when it ran. He watched the light drain from the eastern bank as if the city were drinking the night down in gulps. "Oars," he called, out of his own mouth and out of a life he did not regret, because regret was a luxury. The ships ahead moved like slow beasts. Then the river changed. A smell came, not human, not sea, not the ordinary reek. It was sweet, and the sweetness was wrong. Davos tasted it and wanted to spit it out, but it was in his throat already. "Mathos," he said sharply. "I smell it," his son said. And then the first kettle smashed, and the first green finger licked out over the water, slender and curious as a child's. It found another finger and wove until the river was a hand. Then the hand closed. The walls were alive with men and with silence. For a beat, even the bells paused, astonished at what men had devised. Tyrion stood with his gloved hand extended and watched the wildfire find its marks. The barges were torches. The pitch burned like sermons. For an instant, he thought he had done it, really done it. The clever boy making a trick into a wall. Then the screams began in earnest, and he remembered that tricks fight back when they can, and that the river had a hunger that did not honor plans. "Now," he said to the boy with the horn at his elbow. "Signal." The horn sounded like a bull dying in green grass. Men ran to the winches. Iron scraped like a god with a sore throat. The chain woke under the water, heavy as judgment, and began to rise. On the eastern bank, near a gate the small folk called the Muddy Way, the hound stared at flame moving on water as if it had learned to speak. His mouth made a line. He gripped his sword. He did not know what he said to himself. The old words were mud. Somewhere far off, a girl's voice began to sing in a room full of women who thought wine could stop time. It came thin through stone and still found him. For one breath, he believed he could hold a wall, with a song tied about his head like a scarf. For the next breath he remembered fire and ran toward it anyway, because that was what his feet knew to do. In the holdfast, Sansa sang of snow falling on the stone of Winterfell, and in the singing found the edge of a place where her father still stood with the light of a winter sun on his hair. Her voice was not strong, but it was stubborn. The ladies wept, and then stopped weeping, as if their tears had been instructed by the melody. Cersei listened with her eyes closed, as if sleep would come if she could imagine it hard enough. Tumbleton's bells did not ring. It had none so grand. It heard the rumor of bells. A raven came in at midnight with a strip of oil-splashed parchment, saying that the river was alight, that Stannis was through, that Stannis was trapped, that Joffrey had ridden onto the walls and looked splendid, that Joffrey had hidden under the throne, that the Hound had flipped and fled, that the Hound had stood in the gate and held hell with his hands, that the chain had snapped, that the chain had snapped, that the chain had snapped, that the chain... The raven took a piece of oat from Margaery's palm and cocked its head as if to say, "Decide." "We move at dawn," Loras said bitterly. "We move," Olenna said, "when men stop mistaking smoke for news." Margaery lay awake and made a map in her head of a city she had never walked. She set her hand upon the imagined stones of the muddy way. She set the other upon a boy's head, not Joffrey's, not any boy's in particular, simply a head that smelled of sweat and fear. "You live," she whispered in the dark, and did not know whether she was praying for a stranger at the wall, or for the girl singing in the castle, or for herself. Tyrion's head rang. Something had struck him. He remembered the glitter of a halberd, the flash in a man's eyes, when he realized he could make a new world with a single swing. He tasted copper and grit. He found his feet, because he found his voice first, and it would not be left behind. It dragged him up like a hook. "With me," he bellowed. And men did, because there was something indecently funny in watching a dwarf lead them where tall men had faltered. He saw the Hound moving like a man inside a nightmare that had become a corridor. He saw green tongues licking at the ankles of boats still too far from the chain. He saw, beyond all that, the flat, implacable face of the sea, as if it said, "You are children playing with candles." On Black Betha, Davos lost his boy to the light. He knew it, and did not know it at once. The heat had a voice. It said, not unkindly, that debts come due. He found himself in a world made of sparks and smoke and orders without subjects. He looked once toward the city and thought he saw a small figure on the wall. Not a king, not a saint, simply a person framed in a square of stone. And then the sight went out, or his eyes did. As the night burned, the Tyrell camp breathed in like a creature that intended to sit up. Horses were watered and not slept. Loras did not sit at all. He ran a whetstone down his blade until the sound made men's teeth itch. He looked toward the east and seemed to be listening, as if a sister's song could walk miles in the air. When the dawn finally came, narrow and uncertain, he turned to his grandmother and opened his mouth as if he had found words that would unmake caution. Olenna looked at him and shook her head a fraction, and in that small gesture Margaery saw the whole history of their house. Wine held back until the feast, gold weighed to the grain, a hand that never reached too quickly. "We will be late if we go," Loras said. "We will come like rain after fire." "Rain has its time," Olenna said. "Would you drown embers? Or wet ash?" She did not smile. "Ride and see," she allowed, as one indulges a young hawk's first flight. "No banners, no trumpets. Take men who know mud. Bring me truth, not smoke." He went, swift and bitter and beautiful, and Margaery watched him until the dust swallowed him. She stood a long time after that, her hands folded, the morning gnawing at her, and practiced saying no in her head in case someone came to ask for her again. With the city still burning, she said yes once too, into the empty air, to see how it tasted. It tasted of sweet wine left too long to the heat. The day wore on while the river decided the fate of men. Word came piecemeal and wrong-footed. Stannis' infantry found the shore. Stannis' battering ram kissed the gate. Stannis' men broke on spikes hidden in mud. The green fire burned long past reason, feeding on a thing none of them could name. The chain held, a drawn mouth with iron teeth. The chain broke. Both were true in the mouths of different birds. Tyrion was dead. Tyrion was a demon. Joffrey was brave. Joffrey was a shriek. The Hound was gone. The Hound was a wall. It was as if the city itself had become a story that no single voice could tell. Near twilight, when the world went copper and tired, Loras returned with mud up to the knees of his horse, and a look in his eyes that made men stop talking. He went straight to the dais where Olenna sat, and the hall fell quiet by instinct. "They hold," he said, and the word was both balm and question. "Barely. They hold not like a sword but like a tooth." "Stannis?" Olenna asked. "He is not through," Loras said. "He has men enough to make a second wave a thing that hurts." The Hound left the gate and did not return. He glanced at Margaery. The dwarf holds pieces together with his voice and his hands. He made a face that might have been admiration had it not been so exhausted. The boy king is a boy. He looked toward the east as if it still required his eyes. They could break. They could endure. It is a knife on a rope. The Tyrells can cut it or tie it. Olenna said lightly, and picked up a fig. She bit, and the sweet burst. "We will dress," she said, as if they were going to a supper. "We will polish our knives and our perfumes and our terms. We will ride with banners when the need for banners is clearest. And you," she said to Margaery, "will ready all your no's and all your yeses. We will require both." Margaery nodded. She felt the great wheel turn, and knew that the worst of power was not the weight, but the timing. She went to her tent and stood in the fading light with her maid unlacing the rose-colored gown. For a moment she closed her eyes and felt the cool of the arbor, the smell of bruised mint. She breathed. When she opened her eyes, the world had decided nothing yet. That, too, was a decision she could use. By the river, Tyrion coughed green-spiced ash and did not die. He found his feet again because he could not afford not to. He looked out over the water lit with improbable winter and saw, beyond the ships and the chain and the frantic geometry of battle, the suggestion of movement behind the haze, a standard with a golden rose hidden in the folds, or only a mistake of light. He laughed aloud at himself, a cracked sound, and lifted his arm to signal again. In Maegor's holdfast, Sansa's song faltered. The women had drunk too much, and fear had learned to pace. Cersei stood, face very calm. "Sing something else," she said softly. "I do not know any more," Sansa said, and her voice did not shake, and for that her heart felt big enough to choke her. "Not until I hear how the story ends." "Ah," Cersei said. "It never ends. It only changes rooms." She poured wine into Sansa's cup herself. "Drink, little bird. The bells will tell us what the ravens cannot." Far to the southwest, in a town that had never meant to be a place where history stopped for breath, the rose banners lifted in a trial wind. Loras slept at last with his head on a folded cloak, his mouth slack in a way no court had ever seen. Olenna counted stones with her eyes and put the next day in her pocket. Margaery lay down and dreamed not of kings or crowns, but of a kitchen with a long table, and warm loaves standing like sentries. And when she woke, the smell of bread was gone, and there was only the thin reach morning, and a cup of cold water, and the choice still waiting, tempered and sharp, like a blade held over a flame, and then dipped. No raven could tell her when to say yes. No letter would save them from their timing. She bathed, and her maid brushed her hair until it crackled, and outside the tent, the hooves shuffled, and the lords argued softly. And in the city a chain held, or did not, and the green fire found places in men where it could live. The day went about its business. The Tyrells closed their packs with the efficient patience of a house that had fed kingdoms for 100 years. The river said nothing. The bells were too far to be heard. She stepped out into the light. The air had that taste of something having been decided far away without any of them knowing yet. She raised her hands, and the men fell quiet in the expectant way of people who had learned that a woman could make rooms breathe differently with a gesture. "Today," Margaery said, and did not say more. She did not say which word she would choose when they reached the city smelling of ash and iron, and whatever came after. She let the word hang as a bridge. Men could walk such bridges for hours. It was a kind of mercy, and a kind of knife. On the walls, Tyrion swayed and laughed again at nothing and everything, because the sight behind the haze had resolved, at last, into a color that was not his enemy's blue. Not yet. Not for certain. But something with petals in the wind. He spat blood into his palm and closed his hand and turned to shout down the line, and in the shouting he felt, for the first time all day, not victorious, not saved, but accompanied. In the holdfast, the lady's laughter spiked and vanished, as if someone had cut a string. Cersei looked up, head cocked as if hearing through stone. Sansa's heart leaped of its own accord, not toward hope exactly, but toward the place where a no might become a yes, and not be a betrayal of anything, except a future she could not live in. By the Blackwater, Davos floated with his hand on a piece of broken spar, and his mind making lists of the ways he might still be useful to the world. He did not know his son. He knew the river. He knew the smell of decisions that men told themselves were made by gods. At Tumbleton, Olenna smiled a fox smile at something only she could see unrolling, measure by measure, in the future's careful script. Loras stirred and reached for a sword that was not there. Margaery looked toward the east and decided, for this single breath, to feel nothing and to hold her no like a jewel inside her cheek, ready to be swallowed or spit or set upon a chain and worn where all could admire it and none could quite name it. The bells had not yet found the right voice. The day leaned forward, listening. The river burned and did not, depending on which story one preferred. And between them all, in that hum where wars are chosen and girls choose who they will be, while wars are choosing them, the rose kept its scent, thorned and mild, waiting to be gathered or left to fall when it would. Okay. At first light, the smoke lay over the river like a second weather, the kind that forgets the season and invents its own. It crawled and pooled, and sometimes lifted in torn veils to show water that still burned in uneasy patches, green turning to the dull orange of ordinary flame, only after a long fight with the air. The gulls wheeled warily, making wider circles than any sensible bird would, crying at a pitch that made men look up and swear that the creatures had learned curses. Tyrion had slept and had not. The hours after the first sortie became a cracked bowl he carried and carefully did not drop. He remembered the spear wall at the king's gate buckling and mending. He remembered the breath just before his signal, when every man near him seemed to be holding a lungful of the same river. He remembered the moment Mandon Moore's cold fish eyes turned inward, as if he had at last discovered what Tyrion was made of, and wished to carve it out to see if it would twitch. He had screamed something wise and noble like Pod, and his boy had turned into a blade with a hand, jamming it up into Sir Mandon's joint like a cobbler angry at leather. They both fell, Tyrion and the Kingsguard, into a ditch that stank of ash and onions and fear. Later, much later, he would touch the new landscape of his face with cautious fingers and know he had been closer to the other world than a well-bred Lannister should be. For now he was upright by marvel of habit and spite. The chain was up, they told him, then down, then up. The city had learned overnight to think of iron as weather too. Joffrey had gone from the walls at a mother's command carried by Lancel's pail. Shaking lips, the boy king had left like a reed in a current, his gold flowing away and leaving the stone colder. The hound had gone as well, with a sound in his throat that men later would call a song or a howl, depending on what they needed their stories to be. "Wine will swell your face," Maester Franken said to him in the pause between alarms, dabbing at Tyrion's cheek with a linen that once had been white. "You must not." "I must," Tyrion croaked, and reached for the cup as one reaches into a grotto for a treasure madmen claim lives there. It was only sour red. It felt like mercy on his tongue. Varys flowed into the chamber as if the smoke outside were only a perfume he had decided not to wear today. "Our friends along the Roserad have saddled," he said, which meant a great deal and nothing. Lord Tywin advances as a man with an appointment. Lord Mace considers whether to be punctual. "Tell Lord Mace," Tyrion said, and his mouth pulled on the new pain in his face as if someone had tied a string to it, "that the city serves capons tonight. If he wants one hot, he needs to arrive before someone eats his. I suppose we'll call mine a hen." He coughed and tasted iron. "What is your little choir humming?" "That the gods enjoy farce," Varys said. "And that farce smells of smoke." His gaze went softer, and for a heartbeat it was human, not his profession. "You look well for a man who has been murdered." "I am only rehearsing," Tyrion said lightly, because lightness kept his guts inside his body. "Tell Cersei I need more arrows for the King's Gate and fewer fantasies." He set his palm flat on the table to steady the room. "And tell the bells. No, never mind. They don't listen to me." "Dum?" On the south bank, Stannis stood at last in a churned strip of earth that had been a garden yesterday. The palisade ahead bristled with pikes. The gate behind was a mouth with old iron teeth. His jaw worked as he measured both. Men surged around him and fell around him, and he could feel their falling in the soles of his feet. His bannermen shouted orders and found their voices thinning, as if the air had learned to refuse command. "We go up," Stannis said, not loud. He did not need loud. He had carved obedience into these men with years instead of rhetoric. "We go up and over. We do not think of the river. The river is for men afraid to look at walls." He took a ladder himself because he had not come so far to point. He mounted 3 rungs and then the 4th. The 5th creaked like a coffin in a wet spring. The 6th brought him to where arrows look like ideas. The 7th to where they become arguments. The 1st struck his pauldron and glanced away. The 2nd punched into the shield a man held above him like a roof. He climbed still. His breath came harsh, and even as a saw. A rock fell near him and burst into pieces, which became other rocks. He did not curse. The curse was the climb. He gained the top and found iron and faces. Many faces, afraid and not, angry and not, a stew of human weather. A red-haired man lunged, and Stannis' sword met him. The man's eyes bulged in that ridiculous way, as if they wished to depart before the rest. Stannis' blade came away the red of an old dawn. He did not look at it. There were more faces. Behind, the river still muttered its unnatural prayers. Davos Seaworth did not hear them. He was thinking of his fingers, which he had once lost for Stannis, and was now not certain he had not lost again to a different sea. He had fetched up against a section of wreck that smelled of tar, and some spice he could not name. An alchemist's jaste. A hand, his held wood, another hand, not his, had drifted past an hour ago, and he had not looked close. His mind counted. Breaths, the weight of the burnt air, the shapes of ships that had been. When the oars came out of the smoke, he thought he had made them with wishing. They belonged to Salad San, whose ships moved like men who knew how to leave a woman's bed without waking her. "Davos," a voice called, half joy and half accounting. "You owe me for every man of mine that cooked like a sausage." "I owe you for my life," Davos croaked and coughed river. "I have only the life left." "Your king is on the wall," San said. "He will need someone to count his reasons later." He smiled without joy. "Get in, Onion Knight. The gods are cooking a stew, and I do not care for the smell." In Maegor's holdfast, the wine turned in women's mouths from courage to quarrel, and then back, doing the laps it always loved. Cersei's gaze traveled over the room like a skater's blade, leaving fine lines in silk and self-respect. She had Tommen near her knee. The boy had slept and woke and slept again, each time with a sweet weightiness that made Sansa ache in a way that was not about motherhood and not about escape, but about the sight of a creature unafraid. "Your father would have called this noise undisciplined," Cersei said, as if Sansa had asked her what Eddard Stark would think. "He would have set it to rights with a look, if I am any judge." I admired that once. Sansa kept her eyes on the distaff and thread in her lap, a task that calmed ladies who needed calming. The thread refused the needle, as often as it accepted it, which was honest of it. My father did not like noise, she said, true enough to sit safely in the air between them. Cersei's fingers moved in Tommen's hair. Noise is sometimes all that keeps a room from thinking, she murmured. I should send for Pycelle to drone. She smiled without showing teeth. Little bird, if the walls fall, I will drink from this cup. I will hold it to Tommen's lips first, and then I will drink what is left, which will be enough. Do you understand me? Sansa swallowed. Yes, your grace. In her mind's eye the cup filled with snow, and she did not know whether that made its contents better or worse. She sang because the silence after such words felt like a cliff's edge. The song had no name, only a pattern of winter days in warm kitchens, and someone humming while the bread rose. The hum lay under the melody as a ship's keel lies under water. Near to the king's gate a boy with a broken tooth found a drum, and beat it, because beating made him feel like a part of something. The rhythm wandered, and returned. Men shouted in time to it without meaning to. Tyrion felt his knees unlock in a sudden and hated gratitude for the drum, and did not say, as he might on another day, that the boy should beat his way to the sept and ask the mother for a gentler morning. He clapped a man on the shoulder. He spoke of mortar needing to be the city's second skin. He squinted across the river and thought he saw a banner with a blue field and a fiery heart, and the sight made a small place in him freeze. Melisandre was not here. The story said so. But a man's standard could be a sermon long after the priest left it. What does it mean? Podrick asked, very small. When men say we're about to be flanked, it means someone clever has found your unprotected side, Tyrion said. And then, because this was a child, we will move a shoulder there. He pointed with his dagger toward the section where the latter men pressed once more. Bring me Jast. If Jast is dead, bring me a man who owes Jast money. Podrick ran as if he were on a game all boys would envy later. Tyrion leaned his weight onto the parapet, as if it were a friend. The stone answered with a little breath of warm dust. His head rang. A thought came glinting. The Tyrells could arrive now, and the city would cheer them, and then curse them in the same hour for being late. Better a beautiful rescuer who keeps you waiting than a punctual one who does not smile. At Tumbleton, Pettier Baelish arrived with his smile already unrolled. The morning had burned away its mist and left a clarity that made the tents look painted. He came not alone, of course, but with that precise number of attendants that suggested thrift without poverty. His horse had the glossy look of money that takes exercise. His cloak was a thought too plain for a man who liked to have a story told about him before he opened his mouth. Olenna received him not in her tent, but under a spreading tree, in a farmer's yard, that had suddenly learned it was a council chamber. She sat as if she had been planted there seasons ago, and no wind could dislodge her. Margaery stood at her shoulder and felt the leaf shadow pattern itself on her hands like a henna design. Loras had returned not an hour since. He stood in the shade with his hands folded, and made himself look small, which in him read as dangerous. Lady Olenna, Baelish said, bowing with exactly the submission he would show a hungry cat, just enough to keep one's face. Lady Margaery. Sir Loras, the Reach makes war look like a festival. I feel underdressed. Festivals end with crumbs and drunks under wagons, Olenna said. War ends with graves and songs that lie. Sit, Littlefinger. Tell your king's tale. Our king, Baelish corrected amiably, taking the stool with an economy of motion. He has withstood the night's trial by water and fire. Lord Stannis presses at the southern walls. The hand proves a more than ornament. The people pray so hard they have worn grooves in their knees. They are hungry to cheer a savior. How fortunate, he said, showing his neat teeth. That one comes with bread wagons and flowers. Margaery felt her own smile like a ribbon she had chosen. Soft, unthreatening. A color men thought they understood. We are not bread merchants, she said gently. We are gardeners. We plant. We do not throw loaves from saddles. You will be adored either way, Baelish said. To be adored is to be obeyed. He let his gaze skate over her, over Loras, back to Olenna. Lord Tywin is on the Roserad. If you join him, you will enter the city before the last embers cool. The bells will organize themselves into hymns. And afterward, he added as if the thought had shyly approached him at that moment, a marriage before the mother's altar will make of this rescue an order that persists beyond this season. To Joffrey, Olenna said, making the boy's name sound like a fruit one might touch to test its rot. You have a talent for timing, Lord Petter. And you, Baelish said smoothly, for prudence, which is why I bring you a second thought, Tommen. Menderwinde. The leaf shadows paused on Margaery's hands. She did not move. Baelish continued, his voice as mild as watered milk. The boy is docile. He plays with kittens. He will be well liked, and he will be guided as all children must. His gaze slid sideways, a courtesy to Loras' face. The city hears tales of Joffrey that are not well liked. A betrothal to the younger brother remains a betrothal to the crown, and will soothe many whose knees hurt from kneeling to fear. If Lord Tywin allows it, Olenna said. Her tone did not condescend. It detached. If his pride can be taught to walk in new shoes. Lord Tywin's pride dresses itself in realism in the morning, Baelish said, spreading his hands a very little. He cares that the city is held. After, he cares that the line remains golden. Which boy wears the circlet is a matter of presentation, provided it happens as if planned. If, for instance, the Lady of Highgarden were seen first in the city as a rescuer, then as a dutiful betrothed to stability. Olenna's eyes were flints clicking. You brought me the offer you thought I would ask for. She said, not displeased. Very neat of you to pretend you invented it. I am constantly inventing whatever the moment needs, Baelish said. It saves time. He looked now to Margaery for the first time, as if what she would say could alter weather. You will be worshipped either way, my lady. But you will sleep better with a husband whose temper is as even as a millpond. Margaery breathed, and found the mint and thyme she had left by the arbor had found her again. Strange how scent traveled with decisions. I will not wed Joffrey, she said as if she were practicing law in a room that remembered all laws. Not now, and not ever. If the Lannisters desire the Reach to bind with them, they will do it at Tommen's hand, and with the clear understanding that cruelty will not sit in the high seat. If they desire only swords, they may hire sellswords. We have bread and better banners. Ah, Baelish murmured. I love a woman who prices herself correctly. Then you cannot afford me, Olenna said without heat. Tell Lord Tywin we ride when he is close enough to be grateful, without being impertinent. Tell him the city will eat when we arrive. Tell him weddings are best arranged on quiet afternoons, not over screams. Now. And if he is too proud for the younger boy, Baelish said lightly, as if this were an afterthought, and not a test iron to place on flesh, then King's Landing can drink river water until it learns humility, Olenna said. We have stricter diets in the south. Baelish laughed with his lips and not his throat. You will find the road crowded with gratitude, he said, rising. I will bring Lord Tywin your nose wrapped as Ys's. I have a gift for ribbon. He bowed again, and left with a movement, like an apology for dust. When he had gone, Loras let out the long breath of a man who has held himself stiff under sermons. If Renly could have seen him, he said, he'd have stabbed him with a cake fork for that smile. He does not eat cake, Olenna said. He eats the crumbs men fail to see are worth saving. Remember that, Margaery? It will be Tommen or none, she said. I will go into that city with bread and blankets and a surgeon's tent. I will go on my feet. I will not go on a litter covered in lion heads. If Lord Tywin wants us, he will learn the shape of the word please. And good, Olenna said. We will condition him to it like a horse to the bit. Loras, wash the mud off your vows. You will lead the vanguard, but you will wear green. He stared, then understood. She did not have to say Renly's name. He nodded once, and something in him that had been big and unruly since Bitterbridge got up and bowed, and went where it was told. He left without speeches. Those would come later from other mouths. They rode late, so that the sun would sit on their backs when they came near the walls, and etch them in gold. Banners went up unhurried, and then caught a wind that had been waiting. Word ran ahead on bare feet and rolled wheels, even faster than ravens. The Reach comes. The Reach brings bread. The rose has thorns and knives and a smile that makes men stand straighter. The rose has chosen the little boy. By the time the foremost outriders saw the city's western face and the pall of smoke over the water, the city had already begun to arrange its face into gratitude. Tyrion did not see them first. He heard the sound, which was not drum nor bell, but that particular deep surge made by many horses that are not afraid. It is a sound the earth makes using hooves as its tongue. He limped to a vantage that took him too long to achieve with the new map of his cheek, protesting each step. What he saw made him laugh the laugh that frightened men who did not know him. It had too much relief in it to be called sane. Gold with green, roses and rakes. The swagger of Lord Macy's peacocks, and the javelin-straight spears of men who had spent their lives in fields, learning rhythm and patient violence. Tywin came with his bright blocks of Westerland steel, red and hard and square, as a banker's mind. At his right, a space had been left, the way a man leaves a seat for the wife he hopes will forgive him and join his table again. The space filled with the Reach, not as supplicants but as partners, and Tywin's expression did not change, which told Tyrion more than any smile or frown would have. The old lion could move pride around on a board like a rook if it bought 3 squares of advantage. Along the southern bank, Stannis saw the line of new banners resolve from rumor into roses, and the set of his mouth did not alter either. If anything, it sharpened. "We press," he said. "We are too near for fortune to scoff at us." He raised his sword, and the men who loved him and the men who feared him at once lifted their shields. Loras had put on the green armor that had been Renly's. The smiths had adjusted it with quick hands and tears. The boys who had never seen the dead king close ranged in to watch him become a ghost. He rode at the head of a column that knew how to follow a story into battle. A murmur went up from the enemy ranks, not because they believed in specters, but because belief is a useful tool in a moment that requires men to move toward pain. They hit Stannis' flank in a crash that turned the held breath of hours into action. The horsemen broke the line and then reformed. Not because Loras was a genius, but because the Reach trained its men to turn like schools of fish. Tywin's infantry bore down with the unstoppable grammar of Westerland's drill. The city's gates opened where Tyrion had managed to leave them functioning, and a wave of men who had not slept and had eaten lies for days surged out with the degraded joy of men, offered a fresh kind of trouble. What happened then became, in later tellings, a tapestry with a single thread running easy. The rose and lion saved the stag pretender from the other stag. The city cheered. The boy king smiled. The bells and the birds found harmony. The truth under the embroidery was messier and more useful. Knots were tied and cut at once all along the southern wall. Men took wounds they would not discover until their wives touched them that night, with hands that trembled on the discovery of unbroken skin. Podrick killed another man, and vomited after, because the man had coughed on him something that was not blood, but the last of his breath. Bronn shot 3 sailors in the neck, and sang a little after because singing made the noise inside his skull line up correctly. Varys saw a sail captain turn his coat in the instant between Fortune's wheel notching and falling, and made a note in his great invisible ledger, "A man to be allowed to live, for uses later." On the bank, Davos sat wrapped in a borrowed cloak that smelled of salt and perfume, and old sacred oils from some Lycene chapel. He watched Stannis refuse to bend, and felt something awful and sinful like love for that refusal. When the line collapsed, he felt it as a man feels a beam give way under his kitchen roof. He went looking for a boat, not because he thought to win the day with it, but because he had taught his mind to fetch tools whenever the world broke, and it fetched out of habit. Stannis himself did not break. His men pulled him back because blood told their hands what it would mean if he died, and none of them had signed up to change the whole story with a single failed ladder. He struck at the air as if the air were the thing that had betrayed him, and then went very still. "Back to the boats," he said, in a voice no louder than a priest's whisper when the incense is thick. "We have more days than this one." The men who heard him knew that to be both a hope and a sentence. By the time the sun slid down to look between the buildings and the river, the Tyrell wagons had convinced the small folk that gratitude could be made of bread. They had been ready for this. Macy's quartermasters, who were not celebrated in songs because songs do not like ledgers, had done the hard work well. The women in the squares cried when they saw flour as if painted saints had stepped down and touched their cheeks. Boys laughed and swore at once, relief jangling their tongues. At Baylor's sept, a septon with trembling hands lifted a loaf and declared it the mother's mercy, and then cried into it because he could not help himself. Cersei had Tommen on her hip when the first basket of rolls came up the holdfast stair. She bit into one as if into a messenger's throat and chewed savagely, and then laughed, which made two ladies near her begin to cry even harder, because laughter and bread together after fear are hard for delicate women to sort. She set the boy down and smoothed his hair and called for her father. Tywin entered the hall with dust on the shoulders of his cloak, and the look of a man who had decided many things, and would continue deciding them until the world admitted defeat. He kissed Cersei's brow in a gesture that in this family counted as public tenderness. He put his hand briefly on Tommen's head and felt the shape of the skull of a child who slept well and played with kittens and thought love was a wall that held. "Send for the Tyrells," he said, and in saying it placed 1,000 threads where he could pluck them. They came as if they had never been anywhere else. Lord Mace, a parade of feathers, managed by the sober hands of Mathis Rowan and Randall Tarley, who walked like naked swords behind silk. Olenna came on her own feet, which made something in the courtiers shift uncomfortably. Old women should be carried. She carried herself. Margaery wore a gown the color of fresh cream, which was both a mercy and a strategy. The city needed to see something clean. Her hair had been set with a few green stones that might be emeralds or glass. It did not matter. The eye saw green and thought of the river burning, and then thought of fields after rain, and felt saved twice. Tywin's glance went to her like a valuation. He did not prolong it. He looked at Olenna and smiled an inch. "Lady Olenna, your counsel precedes you. Such a pity it cannot cook," she said. "Else you would not be so hungry for it." He accepted the barb as a man accepts a nettle when gathering herbs. "We are grateful for your timeliness. You would have been more grateful had we come an hour sooner," she said, "and less if we had come an hour later. We judged your appreciation well. Shall we discuss the particulars of gratitude?" Cersei watched them with a face that would have done credit to a statue. But her fingers tapped the golden arm of her chair. Margaery kept her eyes lifted just enough to greet and lowered just enough to appear modest. She could feel the room read her like a psalter. The smell of bread came in faintly from the city, and with it the sound of a populace learning to cheer through a sore throat. "Lady Margaery," Tywin said, turning to include her, and by including her admitting that she would not be spoken over as a piece at her grandmother's belt. "Your house has rendered the realm a great service." "The realm is the thing that needed bread," she said. "We have bread. Where would you like it delivered next, my lord?" "Mender." The slightest, fractional pause told her he had noted the move, enjoyed it, and would not let her score twice without paying. "To the men who held the walls. Then to the orphans. Then to the septs that see to the widowed." He did not smile. "The city must learn that mercy has a shape. It looks like a rose for the time being." "Mercy is a habit," Olenna put in. "Not a parade." Tywin inclined his head. "Habits are made by repetition," he said. "We will require many wagons." "And we will require," Olenna said as if the sigu were a fine embroidery stitch, "a husband for my granddaughter who is not inclined to bruise small dogs for sport." Cersei's eyes flashed like a mirror catching noon. "You suggest." "We suggest nothing," Olenna cut. "We state. Joffrey is not fit to be wed to a woman we love. Tommen is gentle. Tommen is moldable. Tommen will be a king who listens to wise men until his wisdom grows." Her expression did not change as she said men. The room heard women. "Joffrey is king," Cersei said, soft and lethal. "Joffrey is king," Tywin said. And the room remembered who made facts. He looked at Olenna. He will marry a lady suitable to his station. It would satisfy me if she wore roses. It would satisfy me, Olenna said, if my granddaughter's children did not need to be hidden from their father. She smiled now, and it was so kindly it made the courtiers recoil a hair from the possibility of their own grandmothers. We brought your city bread. We brought your wall steel that does not break on first use. We will bring you a tie that endures beyond tomorrow, if the tie does not strangle us on the wedding night. Tommen will do. He will more than do. He will charm. And he will allow for a regency that does not make the realm reach for a cup when the bells stutter. Then, Cersei rose. The movement was not a threat. It was simply an eruption of fury that could not sit. You will not unmake my son because you prefer kittens to claws. No one can unmake what is not yet finished, Olenna said. Your elder boy is a stew not ready to be eaten. Ought we to pretend? Or shall we feed the city with something digestible, while the pot boils elsewhere, and quietly? Bender. Tywin's gaze flicked from one woman to the other with the interest of a man who enjoys horses and admires a good race when he sees it. A betrothal to Joffrey, he said, calm, suits the tale the realm now tells itself. The roses and lions save it together. A later adjustment may present itself, but not before the city has ceased to shake. We do not signal weakness 2 hours after a victory. Then signal strength another way, Margaery said, and now she let the room have her voice, soft and even in shape like a story the city would enjoy repeating. Announce that bread will be given each 7th day in the market squares by edict of his grace, and at the expense of the Queen Regent and the handmaid of the mother, whom people in the streets have taken to calling the Knight of Flowers sister, because they do not know my name. She smiled, and it was not self-mocking. It was simply accurate. Announce that widows will receive oil and candles. Announce that boys who lost fathers will be taken in and taught letters at the septs. Announce a tax on wines for a season to pay for roofs burned in the night. Let the realm learn that Joffrey Baratheon knows how to be fed by mercy, and allow me, who am so very good at carrying baskets, to do the carrying for. Cersei's chin lifted a hair, then lowered, which in her meant a concession more significant than tears in another. Tywin's eyes warmed a fraction, which for him was a blessing carved into stone. Very well, he said. You will be seen at the forefront of succor. And at the back of the wedding, Olenna murmured. Unreadable. We will stand behind you and hold the train, if there is to be one. We will speak of weddings when my grandson sleeps and the bells do not ring as if they have caught their tongues on nails, Tywin said. For today, we will call the city safe and feed it. Sir Loras, you will accept command of the City Watch's reorganization. Loras bowed with the grace that had not left him even when rage bruised it. Gladly, my lord. He glanced at Cersei, with a face that said nothing and everything about Renly and knives in the dark, and what vengeance might look like, if constrained by law. When they left the hall, the city had already begun to write a new story on its tongue. It said, the Knight of Flowers rode at our walls in green, and the dead king was seen, and Stannis ran, and the dwarf shouted, and the bells found a tune, and I ate bread with my wife in the doorway, and we didn't have to fight over it. It said, the Rose Girl smiled at me when she passed. I did not think I would ever be smiled at by a lady. It said, the hound is gone, and I am afraid and relieved at once. It said, I was brave, and I was a coward, and I am alive. It said, the river burned, and I will tell my grandchildren about it, and they will not believe me. And I will tell them again and again until they do, because there is nothing else to give a child but stories and warm soup. That night, when the torches were set lower to tell the courtyards it could sleep, Sandor Clegane came to Sansa's chamber, smelling of horse and old ash, and a fear that had dried into something salt. He moved like a man who had set down his armor, and found it had fused to the shape of his bones anyway. She rose because the shape in the doorway demanded it. You sing, he said, catching his breath on the word. Sing me free of this place. His laugh was a knife that missed and cut his own hand instead. No, don't. I don't want your northern ghosts." He leaned in, and the candle cast his face in a bad sculptor's accuracy. Every ruin more true because of the light. "Come with me." She did not say where. She had learned not to grant men's questions too much, and their answers too little. She looked at his eyes, and saw a thing that had not been opened in years. A door he had feared was a wall. "I cannot." she said. And the truth hurt her throat because a part of her had already climbed out over the sill and into the dark with him, and found the fields beyond the roads and the rivers that did not burn. He made a sound, a dog wounded in some honorable way. He reached and then did not. "There is a place in me," he said hoarsely. "That is all ash now. It was straw before, and I thought it strong. I thought I had built a barn. Turns out it was a bed for a spark." His mouth twitched. "Sing to me anyway, bird. One bit of snow. Put it on my tongue." She sang a few lines from a song that was not the one he wanted, and not the one she did either, and that was fitting. When she was done, he had gone. She was not sure when. In the morning there was a blood smear on the latch that had not been there before. She touched it with one finger as if verifying a rune. Davos crawled up the last stretch of stairs to a chamber in a tower that had been made for a different use. Salad Horsan sat on a chair stolen from a lord and ate olives out of a fat blue jar with 2 fingers. "Your king lives," San said with a shrug. "He breathes, and so I am not yet ready to abandon his purse." He popped an olive and sucked the brine from his thumb. "He is learning how to lose. It is a hard lesson for any man, harder for one who believes he never should." "Nendabaral. Where is he?" Davos asked, standing because his knees refused to be separate from his duty. "On a ship that smells worse than this city," San said. "Counting. I think he is counting reasons he still deserves all he wanted this morning." He tilted his head like a bird. "You will go to him and say the thing that makes him not throw himself into the sea. Do not choose the wrong sentence. I like you. I would hate to see you float." Then Davos went down again and out into the night that the city now shared with the stars rather than wildfire. The constellations had shuffled, as they always did when men killed men. His eye had to relearn them. He found the king by looking for the place where breathing sounded like iron filing itself into a key that might fit a particular lock if only one more stroke were made. "Your grace," he said, and the words were a raft. Stannis' gaze came up and took hold, and did not blink for the space of 3 heartbeats. "We will gather again," Davos said. "We will count ships and men and food. We will tie our wounds shut and not look at them. We will plant fear in their hearts by lighting fires on promontories all along the coast until they dream green. We will remind the realm that you did not come with ghosts and feasts and lies, but with iron." "We lost," Stannis said. "Yes," Davos said. "We lost, and still you are here, which is more than I can say for some who have won." He did not glance in the direction of the city. He did not have to. "There's a boy in there will be wed to a girl with roses in her hair, and they will pass loaves, and make a religion of kindness for a month. And the small folk will taste it like sugar on the tongue and forgive the hunger that comes after. And then the bills will come due." "You are good at accounts." Stannis' mouth twitched. It might have been a smile if it had not been on his face. "I will sleep," he said at last, which was a thing he had not done since childhood. "Send me the onion knight in the morning. Not the priests. Now." "I'm here now," Davos said, and Stannis' hand came up and closed once on his shoulder, brief and merciless as his favor had always been. At dawn the city steamed gently, like a vast beast bathed at last. Loras rode the perimeter with the gold-cloaked captains, and told them that a watchman who takes bread is a watchman who will not later take a purse in the alley. He said it in a voice that sounded like a promise and a threat, which is to say, it sounded like law. He did not go near the sept, where the sisters washed bodies laid out like language for a god to read. Later. He would go later and look for men he knew. and men he did not. And assign honor in small ways, a city remembers longer than decrees. Marguerite stepped into the square at the end of the street that had once sold fish, and had been empty for weeks because no fish were fool enough to come up the river, when the city stank of judgment. She had a scarf over her hair, and a basket on her arm, and she moved like a nurse. Women came first, because women always do when there is food and danger in the same place. Marguerite took each loaf as if it were a blessed thing and put it into palms that had washed themselves hastily, and sometimes she found herself touching a wrist or a knuckle in the exchange and let the touch linger the way a candle's heat lingers after you pass your hand through it. Children learned her name before men did, and ran ahead of her the way children do around a procession that is not grim. Olenna watched from a chair that had been dragged to the threshold of a cobbler's shop, and thought of bread the way some lords think of spears. When Petter returned, he stood too near and bowed too low, and she scolded him for both, and then allowed him to stand nearer still, because he was useful when kept within arm's reach. Lord Tywin, he said, has a list of men who must be punished for cowardice, removed for incompetence, or rearranged for others' ambition. He asks your counsel, which is to say your complicity. Give him my list, Olenna said. It will be the same with better spelling. And the betrothal? Not today. Today she's every man's sister, carrying bread. Tomorrow, she will be every man's hope carrying a treaty. Do not confuse the two, or I will have you serve bread yourself from a cart, while I sit in your chair and count your gold. Then? Baelish laughed, delighted at the picture. There are men in this city who would sell their last coin to watch me pass loaves, he said. I will not deprive them long. His glance went to Marguerite. It is a pretty thing, Mercy used correctly. It is not a thing, Olenna said sharply. It is a habit, and habits are what houses are made of, not pretty things. Do not mistake us. When dusk came, the bells tried a new song. It faltered less. In the Red Keep, a feast was laid that no one had wanted, and so everyone needed. Lannister Red and Tyrell Green did not clash. They made a noise together that could be heard down the corridors and out into the ward. Sansa sat where protocol made her and tasted each dish, and remembered to praise each, and then could not swallow the third mouthful of capon, because the smell of the skin was too like the smell of fear when it turns sweet in the heat. Joffrey preened because he had been told he was brave, and because the room was built to reflect him. When Cersei looked at him, the pride in her eyes was made of iron filings in a glass tube. Shake it, and a different shape would appear, but the filings would remain filings, not bread. Tywin ate as a man eats fuel. His glance passed over Loras with calculation, and stopped at Marjorie the way a hunter's gaze halts on a deer and measures distance. Olenna picked a bone clean and dropped it in a bowl, then dabbed at her mouth in a gesture that meant, I am ready to break you and stitch you in the same hour if it profits me. When the boy king stood to offer thanks, his little speech held the shape of an old lesson and the improvisations of a child, eager to be praised for his cleverness. He called the Tyrells dear friends. He named Loras a paragon. He did not name Tyrion. The omission hung, obvious to anyone who listened with their eyes too. Tyrion drank and found that wine could do nothing for a hole that was in a face and not a heart. He glanced at Sansa and saw on her mouth the stillness he had learned to recognize. A person at work not to drown. Afterward, when the tables were cleared and the musicians took up something that had been cheerful yesterday, and could not quite get its feet under it today, Marguerite stood beside a window that gave on to darkness, and listened to the city's changed breathing. Loras came and rested his forehead very briefly against the back of her hand, in a gesture of such old childhood that it made her throat tighten. I wore his armor, he said, as if confessing a theft. For a moment they thought he had come back. For a moment I did too. You brought his promise, she said. That is the part we needed. And then, I took it away when I took the helm off, he said. So I owe them something else. Maybe I give them laws. Give them safety, she said softly. Give them a watch that does not sell daughters for a night's peace. She let her fingers touch his hair. Small as a benediction. We will take up the rest when the city can breathe, without counting whether the smell is wine or smoke. In his tower, Varys set down notes in his invisible book. The sell-sail captain who turned. The baker who hid loaves under his oven for the children. The boy with the drum. The boy with the drum. The gold cloak who wept. The green-haired courtesan who turned her salon into a ward for the burned. He added a line under Margaery's name. Habit, not gesture. And under Olenna's. Steel, not lace. He left Tyrion's page open without writing, as one leaves a door ajar for a friend who has not yet decided whether to come in or die in the courtyard. Tywin took counsel late. His men spoke as men do when tired and proud. They told the truth and flattered it. When they had gone, he sat a while longer and considered the word Tommen. He tasted it. It was milk. He did not dislike milk. He merely preferred wine. He could season milk. His quill made a sound like winter straw as it moved over parchment. He wrote to Dorne. He wrote to Oldtown. He wrote to a cousin who mattered. He did not write to Robb Stark, because defeat there would not be written, only done. He did not write to Stannis because there was nothing to say to a man who did not bargain. Far away, in a room that had lost 3 windows to the heat, and thus learned to be humble, Stannis stared at his sword and did not see it. Selyse spoke, and he did not hear her. His brother's ghost and Renly's antlered smile had no more power here than the faint hiss the sea makes when it breathes in its sleep. Melisandre's absence was a cold space he found himself resenting, like the shadow of a tree that refuses to move when you do. He counted again. He would count tomorrow. He would not stop counting until the numbers told a different tale. The city slept. Not all, not well, but it slept. On the walls, a watchman leaned and listened to the sound of water, forgetting how to burn. In an alley, a woman who had not thought she had any tears left, cried one more and was surprised by it, and then slept with her mouth open like a child. In the Red Keep, Sansa dreamed of bread too heavy to lift, and when she woke she could smell only her own hair and the candle gone to a nub. She lay very still and decided that she would volunteer to carry loaves on the morrow. She wondered if that decision was bravery or only a way to keep from thinking of the man at her door and the cup near the Queen's hand. She decided it did not matter what it was called. At Tumbleton, empty now but for the prince the Tyrell host had left in its fields, a boy who had run to war and found only order in lines and shouts returned to his mother, hand in a sling he would never be able to explain. She wrapped him as if he were fire, and she were cold, and neither of them spoke until the light had changed to the gray that comes when a day is unsure of itself. Then she said, "Did you see the lady?" And he said, "I saw bread." And she laughed until a neighbor scolded her for being unseemly in joy. Dawn came again, as it always does, even when men doubt the mechanics. The bells tried another song and almost found it. The chain lay in the river like a tired snake. The city's market made a racket that sounded almost like commerce and not like prayer. Margaery put on a plain gown and tucked her hair up and went down among the baskets. She knew now which streets to avoid at certain hours because men slept there in a way that made waking them a cruelty. She knew which septa scolded too much and which would slip a child an extra heel with a wink. She was learning the map of the city by its hungers, which is the only map that matters if you mean to stay. By noon, Petyr had arranged for whispers to run that the mother had blessed this union of rose and lion. By sundown, Olenna had arranged for contrary whispers to complicate the first. That the mother had blessed bread and had not said a word about beds. Between them, truth found it could breathe, which is to say men could argue and eat, and that combination is the beginning of peace if you keep it fed. In the evening, Tywin sent for Olenna and Margaery again. He did not summon Cersei. He had counted her presence a hindrance to this kind of arithmetic. He informed them, in the even voice of a man who gives out stipends, that a royal proclamation would go forth at dawn. Lady Margaery of House Tyrell was to be betrothed to King Joffrey Baratheon, in recognition of House Tyrell's service and the affection between the houses. The wedding would be set upon a suitable day, after a mourning period for those fallen in the defense of the city. Bread distributions would continue in perpetuity. Affection, Olenna repeated, amused. A fine word. It covers so many arrangements. Affection is easier to sell than necessity, Tywin said. Affection sells until it doesn't, Olenna said. We will accept your phrasing. We will accept your bread edict. We will not accept a wedding date until we have seen whether your grandson can speak to a dog without kicking it. Tywin's mouth did not betray him. "We will consider the calendar elastic," he said dryly. "Speak to the boy, Lady Margaery. If anyone can teach a nettle to be touched, it is a rose." She inclined her head. "I will try," she said. It felt like saying, "I will carry fire in my apron and not let the sparks fall on the straw." She would try anyway. There was bread to be handed out in the morning, and there was a city eager for spectacle in the afternoon. She would give them both. Loaves and a glimpse of her hand near a king's sleeve, and nothing more that day. Habit, not gesture. In the corner of that same hour, Tyrion sat with a cup and a quill, and tried to shape a letter to a father he both feared and understood too well. He scratched. The chain held. The wildfire burned. The hound fled. The boy left the wall. Your eldest son acted the part his stature permitted. Men followed a voice because it made sense when their eyes could not. He did not write. I nearly died of an enemy who kisses our family's ring. He sealed the letter with wax and pressed the hand's badge into it with the same hand that sent the missive away, and wondered whether he had pressed too hard or not hard enough. He set the ring down on the table and watched it settle. It looked like a thing that had been carved for another man's finger. He smiled, which tugged the wound, and told himself he did not mind the pain when it told him he was alive. He would mind later. He would mind in the morning when Cersei smiled as if nothing had been saved, except her version of events. He would mind when Tywin found a chair that better suited the shape of his will, and Tyrion's chain became only a story men told at taverns to explain how they had managed to keep drinking. He would mind when Petyr Baelish brought in yet another idea wrapped in silk, and they would all have to pretend it had not been thought of around a farmer's table when the bread was hot. For now he leaned back and let the last of the day's smoke leave the air above the city, and smiled because the bells had found a tune that could be hummed by men not born to harps. Down in the square, Margaery broke a loaf with a woman whose hands shook. "I was in labor during the Green Night," the woman said almost conversationally, the way women sometimes report horrors as if commenting on the weather to tame them. "We named him for the sound the river made because his father said it would make him brave." "What is the sound's name?" Margaery asked, as if this were common custom. "Wrath," the woman said. And the baby the size of 2 fists sneezed, as if offering punctuation. "That is a good name," Margaery said gravely, and she imagined the boy in 10 years throwing stones from a dock, and in 20 standing with flour on his shirt at a counter, and in 30 sitting with a girl in a doorway when the heat had gone and the air remembered how to cool. "He will need bread again tomorrow," she added, as if promising a man work. "We all will," the woman said soberly. When dusk laid its thumb upon the city again, it did so lightly, as if fearing to bruise. In the tower where he made and unmade men with appointments and absences, Tywin studied a list and crossed out 2 names with a stroke that looked like a small execution. In a room that smelled of sweat and wax, Loras traced the pattern of the city's watch, and found the places where men lied and decided not to hang them, not yet. On a ship that had been scrubbed until it smelled like new linen over old salt, Stannis slept the sleep that comes after you bruise your will against the world and the world stands. It is not rest, but it is an absence of effort. Davos sat outside his door and counted prayers he did not believe in, and found himself at peace with that arithmetic. In her chamber, Sansa opened the shutters and let in the noise of a different city than yesterday's. She could smell bread and the faint, clean ash of fires that had learned at last how to die. She could see a strip of sky that had remembered blue. She put her hands on the sill and thought, not of north or south, crowns or chains, but of the feel of a loaf's crust under her palm, rough and reassuring. She sang 3 notes under her breath. They could have been from any song. They could have begun any story. And far in the reach, where gardens turn and practice the art of seeming effortless, bees moved from flower to flower, with the sober determination of old tradesmen. The work went on. It always does, after victories and losses alike. The hive must be kept, the honey brought in, the young taught where sweetness is found, and how much work it costs. The rose, which had refused to be used quickly, was now being used properly, which is to say repeated daily until the city forgot what it was like to be hungry without help, and then remembered, and then forgot again. In that forgetting and remembering, is where power lives most comfortably. Night pushed in. The bells went still. A dog barked 3 streets away and was answered by another. On the river, something heavy shifted, and the water accepted it with the patient slap of an old friend. In the Red Keep, in a small room where a goblet stood half full and a candle half gone, a queen touched her son's hair and practiced a smile for the morrow, and a girl from the north watched her hands and practiced the habit of breathing. The story did not end. It changed rooms, as Cersei had said. Margaery stepped through its next door with a basket on her arm, and a no in her mouth polished into something that could, if necessary, be placed on a cushion and called a yes. K. The tourney grounds below Rhaenys Hill were still littered with splinters and green-scored stones when they brought the boy king out to taste the air and to be seen, for seeing had become a food the city needed. Joffrey walked with his mother's hand on his shoulder like a hawk's jess, light and ready to tighten. The crowd moved in waves that were not all affection. Relief has its own noises, and some of them sound like love from a distance. Margaery watched from the edge of the platform where Tywin and Olenna sat like winter and summer side by side, one withholding, one ripe, and told herself that the work today was not to charm but to measure. The crossbow came like a thought Joffrey had been saving for dessert. A page who had learned the shape of his king's face fetched it without needing to be told. Cersei's mouth did not tighten. The boy caressed the bow as if it were a small, mean dog that knew tricks. "A good day for a Vale," he said to nobody who could safely disagree. "The wind is a coward. It hides. Nanro." He pointed toward a set of straw butts set up hastily where the earth still remembered Renly's rainbow pavilions. Flowers first, Joffrey decided, and looked at Margaery as if he had flung her name like a coin into a crowd and waited to see whether it bought him smiles. Margaery's answering look carried mint and cool water, and the careful habit of a woman who knew how to stand in a doorway and make it seem a garden. "Your Grace shoots first," she said lightly. "I am better at moving targets who run from my baskets." Laughter. "Safe and small." Joffrey preened, set the butt against his shoulder, drew, and loosed. The bolt struck true at 20 paces. It broke straw, and stayed, and the ooh rolled across the people like a gull's shadow. He ordered 5 more. He missed one. He scowled at the sky as if it had betrayed him. A boy ran from the crowd at the back without knowing he meant to, a creature of impulse and hunger. "Bread for the mother's blessing," he shouted, and then went silent, realizing he had made himself a sentence before a king who liked periods. Joffrey lowered the crossbow so slowly it might have been a snake uncoiling. "Bread," he repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. "My betrothed has taught you to beg prettily." Margaery's mouth held a smile soft enough to be a bandage. "We have taught each other," she said. She stepped down from the platform and put her hand into her basket, as if reaching into a sacristy box. She drew out a small loaf and broke it, as a septimite, and put half into the boy's shocked hands. "The blessing is that we can share," she said. To Joffrey without turning, "Your Gracie's name is in every loaf." The crowd made that sound again, of gratitude coached into a cheer. Joffrey's jaw eased a fraction. He lifted the crossbow again, not toward the boy, not toward anything alive. Margaery felt the city breathe. Cersei's eyes moved like knives hidden in silk. After, when the nobles had been fed, the sight they had come for, and the small folk had been fed something more practical, Tywin's men arranged a progress along the street of flour. Margaery walked with Cersei because that was part of today's lesson. The Queen Regent looked jeweled even in daylight. Pearls cannot help it. Her smile sat on her face like a thing that had been trained with a rod. "You are tireless," Cersei observed. It was not a compliment. It was a cataloging of a weapon's edge. "Tiredness is a habit too," Margaery said gently. "I never learned it." They passed a baker's that had been burned and reopened already with a plank laid across 2 ale barrels for a counter. A child on the stoop sucked on a heel of bread, eyes enormous, face smudged with joy and ash. Cersei's gaze lingered a heartbeat, a thing so small one could miss it if one were not standing at her elbow watching for bruises and kindness both. "Your brother reforms the watch," Cersei said, as if trading bread for gossip. A garden boy teaching thorns how to stand straight. He knows how to make men feel seen, Margaery said. So they do not need to be cruel to be visible. She let the word cruel sit, a bird on a fence, neither shooed nor coaxed. Cersei's mouth quirked. You speak like a septa and a whore both, she said conversationally. That is a compliment. Then I accept it, Margaery said, and earned a look that acknowledged the parry. At the next square, Tywin had placed an orator on a crate. The man's voice carried like hot iron. He spoke of gratitude and mercy and debts paid not with coins but with sweat. He said Joffrey's name too often and Margaery's just enough. He said Tywin's once, and that was exactly the right once to say it. A city learns new prayers quickly if the bread does not run out for 2 days together. They returned by the Street of Steel, where the armorers had begun to polish courage back onto things. In a narrow lane, a kitten as pale as milk darted, and a boy of 6 pursued with both hands out like a man catching rain. Tommen broke from the cluster of pages and knights like a sheep from a flock, and knelt in the dirt with a small huff of joy. Careful, he told the younger boy seriously. They don't like to be picked up by their tails. They don't? The smaller boy asked, arrested by this science. No, Tommen said. They like to be told they are brave, and then they come to you. He held out his palm, and the kitten, being a creature as susceptible to tone as men are to bread, came. Tommen did not look up, and so did not see his mother's expression soften for a breath, as if memories had brushed her cheek. He only stroked the kitten with a mastery of gentleness that was instinctive and not learned. Margaery watched the angle of Cersei's jaw and turned her gaze away before the woman felt herself watched. One must allow a mother her unguarded seconds in a realm where even drinking water was politic. She knelt too. You are very wise, Your Grace, she murmured to Tommen. Brave things come when they are not shouted at. He glanced up and colored. I like them, he said simply. The simple thing in the air refreshed her like a draught not drugged. Will you show me the rest of your menagerie someday? She asked in a tone that made someday into a thing to be looked forward to, not a delay to be resented. He nodded vigorously. Sir Pounce is the bravest, he confided. Sir Whiskers is medium brave, and Boots is not brave, but he tries. Those are the best knights, Margaery said gravely. The ones who are not brave and try anyway. Cersei's eyes flickered between them and measured a threat that looked like a child with a cat. He is betrothed, she said later in the carriage. Lo, for Margaery's ear alone, do not make your heart foolish with what cannot be. It is not foolish to like a child, Margaery said. It is practice. For what? Cersei's tone was acid masquerading as curiosity. For ruling a house without breaking its toys, Margaery said with her softest voice, which carried as far as the next seat and no further. The carriage went on, the world outside answering to wheels and hooves, and inside the two women sat with their words tucked like needles. Loras's reform of the watch was not poetry. It was lists and boots. He walked the barracks with Randall Tarley at his elbow and a clerk behind with quill and ink that never seemed to dry. He named captains who had a spine and dismissed those who had learned to bend for coin too often. He suspended judgment where the truth had gotten itself muddy with hunger. On a corner near the hook, where the wind-channeled river smells into an accusatory stream, he stopped an old gold cloak with a squint and asked him his name. Joth, the man said, wary. How long at this post? Since the dragons were eggs, Joth said with a courage that looked like insolence and was not far off. Did you take bread yesterday? Loras asked, not unkindly. Joth blinked. I took bread with my girl. We hadn't had aught hot in a week. Good, Loras said. Take it again today, and when a man offers you coin to look the other way when he beats a washerwoman, you remember that bread in your gut, and tell him he cannot pay you better than your own breakfast. We will have snarls yet, he added to Tarley, moving on. Let them snarl at us, not at girls in alleys. You are soft, Tarley observed, like a physician pronouncing on a slow fever. I am strategic, Loras said, and the angle of his mouth made men step aside, because it looked so much like steel wrapped in velvet. One could not tell which would show first. In the Tower of the Hand, Tyrion stood before his father and was instructed that mathematics had heroism to it, that a dwarf's voice could not match. Tywin sat at the great table like a weight placed to hold down a map that wanted to blow away. He did not say thank you. He said, "The city was saved by a confluence of planning, courage, and timely arrival. Any attempt to take sole credit will appear childish." He tapped the parchment. "Baelish leaves for the Vale in 3 days. The Riverlands require a finger to stir them. You will vacate the Hand's chambers before then." "I shall miss the chain," Tyrion said dryly. He could not help his mouth. It had learned to fend for him like a dog a boy raises for company and finds useful in alleys. It complements the scar. Together they make a story. "Scars make men memorable," Tywin said. "Not indispensable. Do not mistake one for the other. There remains another matter." "Then?" "Of course there did. Matters in this castle nested like dolls." "Enlighten me," Tyrion said, because insolence was a spice, and he did not like his meat plain. "Lady Sansa," Tywin said. "The North." Tyrion let the hand that was not on his cup relax a fraction. "Your plan would waste a fine girl on a Lannister," he said. "I cannot approve." "You approve nothing," Tywin said mildly, which in him was the tone he took when the hook was already through your gill. "You obey. I will not spend another season watching the North call itself a kingdom. I will cut it, and dress it, and hang it in our larder to age into strength. I require a knife that looks like a ring." "Bender." Tyrion sipped wine and looked at the pattern of sunlight on the table, as if the light could be turned to a counsel. He thought of Sansa's hands on a sill, of her voice in a room of women learning to drink fear to the dregs, of the way she had looked at him and seen not a monster, not a savior, not a man to trust, but a man who could be counted as a known weight. "And if the girl will not?" he asked softly. "She will," Tywin said. "The ways were invented in the reign of Aegon, and improved upon since." He turned a page. The matter was done in him as soon as it was spoken. When Varys came to Tyrion's chamber that evening with a small smile like a folded fan, Tyrion said before the other could, "I am to be a husband." "To the North," Varys said mildly, and it was both a confirmation and a condolence. "The Queen of Thorns meets with the High Septon tomorrow. She will pour the faith into the city like oil, into a sticking hinge. You see, my friend, we are to have the mother, the father, and the stranger all at once, if we count your marriage properly." "Menadso, which am I?" Tyrion asked. "Do not say the maiden. I am short of innocence." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. The new bone hummed. "Joffrey will marry the girl he does not deserve in a season or 3, and the city will sleep with one eye open. Meanwhile, we afflict the Stark child with my charms. I would rather be clever than cruel." "Be both then," Varys said, "not without kindness. Clever cruelty is less painful in the application, I am told." Margaery and Sansa met in a cool gallery where the wall held stone flowers that had outlived so many living ones that a person might think stone kinder than rain. Shay lingered as a shadow. Margaery sent her away with a glance that was not command exactly and not request either, but a thing between nobles that says we know how to fill the space etiquette leaves. "I am told," Margaery said, "that I am to be a queen twice over." Sansa's mouth trembled. She had learned to hold her face as a plate holds salt. Today the salt was damp. "Twice," she managed. "That is better than thrice," Margaery said, and Sansa could not help it. She laughed, a small broken sound that repaired itself in the air. They sat on a bench where a draught came through a cleverly carved vent and made the hair at the back of the neck stir as if a powdered moth had landed and taken off again. "I came to thank you," Sansa began, faltering over the words because she did not know what she was thanking for and what she was apologizing for yet in the same breath. "For bread?" Margaery asked. "That is not mine. It is ours. Thank the city for believing in it. For not letting a boy be punished for asking." Sansa said. He shouted, "And my heart." She made a fist briefly, as if around something that had been swollen and was now permitted to shrink. Marguerite looked at the girl as one looks into a mirror, and sees not oneself, but a version that might have been. "We will make more rooms where nobody needs to shout," she said. "You will stand beside me and hand out loaves if you like. They will see you doing it, and remember that your father believed in justice. Now, I do not know what to do when men say my father's name," Sansa confessed. And that truth was like a small brave animal peeking from brush. "It hurts and helps. Both. Both is the only honest word some days," Marguerite said. She let silence sit with them until it felt like a companion. "I have heard," she said at last, "that they mean to give you a ring." Sansa's eyes dropped to her hands as if expecting to find iron there already. "I do not. They do not ask. They only bring me cups. I drink. I sing. I eat." She stopped, the thought too large. "Do you like him?" "Which?" Marguerite asked evenly. "The boy with the bow, or the man with the wine?" Sansa flinched and laughed in the same breath. "Either. Both. None. I like the city," Marguerite said. "It is a man and a woman and a dog all in one, and it needs to be fed 3 times a day, and praised and corrected and put to bed when it gets overtired. I like Tommen. He is a boy who will one day be a man who listens before he speaks. I do not like knives that smile while cutting." "That is all the truth I can give you today." Sansa nodded. "It is more than most give," she said, standing. "If they put a ring on my finger, I will still come to carry bread." "Bring Shay to help," Marguerite said. "She pours wine with a look that makes men behave." Something like hope crossed Sansa's face and hid in the hollows again. She curtsied and went, and the gallery went on making its quiet air while Marguerite sat and counted the times in a day a woman could intercept a blade meant for a girl without raising the arm that would give the motion away. In the Sept of Baelor, the High Septon listened to Olenna Redwine speak of habit and alms, and the price of candles, with the weary gratitude of a man whose God is large and whose budget is small. She spoke of the Mother's Bakery in the Iron Square, and the need for a school where boys and girls could learn letters that would later make them count fairly with their fingers. "We shall call them the Mother's Lessons," she said. "You shall appear and nod. Nodding is a sacrament for some. For others, it is bread. We shall serve both." The High Septon, who had been chosen because he had a voice that comforted and hands that did not stray, found tears in his eyes before he knew why. "You will make the city love you more than it loves God, my lady." Olenna smiled with genuine pity. "Gods do not take hurt from love given to neighbors," she said. "They only starve when men hoard it." In the harbor, Petyr Baelish's ships took on gifts that looked like silk and tasted like debt. He was made Lord of Harrenhal in parchment, and of opportunity in fact. He found Marguerite in a corridor where the windows looked west at an hour when the light made silhouettes of everything. "I bring you a present," he said, all charm. "I have bread," she said. "We need a different shape." "A rope," he mused. "To tie a bridge? To hang a man? To save a child? They are all one thing, until the moment comes." He offered a small casket. Inside lay a necklace of golden roses interlaced with tiny enameled bees. It was delicate and dear, and said the thing he wanted said. "We make the same metaphors, you and I." "Pretty," Marguerite said, and closed the lid. "Give it to a girl who needs to be seen." "I am seen. Bring me instead the name of a gold cloak who sells girls to soldiers. I will give that to Sir Loras." He laughed, delighted at being thwarted so elegantly. "You are wasted on kings," he said. "I am used by cities," she answered, and curtsied exactly enough to acknowledge that his wit had not left the room without hers. On Dragonstone, Davos found the dungeon seemed almost a kindness after days of smoke and green light. He had meant to kill Melisandre. He had found instead that his hands shook, and his heart betrayed him by still beating. The Red Woman came to his cell and looked at him through the bars, as at a subject who had failed an examination. "You throw away the only fire that will light your king's path." she said. I have sat beside a brazier too long, Davos said. Fire makes men see visions after a while. I trust ropes and oars. I trust men like me who can count. Then count the times your caution has saved you from greatness, she said, and smiled as if the words themselves were warm. The boy with their bastard blood will come, and his blood will wake stone. I have dreamed it. Bell. Dream better, Davos said, and crossed himself without meaning to, not to the red god but to whatever god remembered men who kept oaths without liking them. When Stannis came to him later with sleepless eyes and hands that could not let go of the map long enough to touch the man who had saved him from drowning twice now, Davos said, I am your friend. Kill me or use me. Do not put me in dark to rot. I will come out rotten and be of no use to you. Stannis stared at him as if at a candle that had learned to talk. You hate my god, he said. I hate apathy, Davos said. Your god is a kind of activity, but I will not cut a boy to light a braziers. Call me traitor. I call myself a father. Stannis' face worked, which in him was a storm. At last he took the key from his girdle and held it. You will be hanged, he said, because you cost me comfort. I have too much of that already. The key turned. The red woman laughed softly in some other part of the world, and went on weaving dreams with smoke. For there are many hands on any man's fate, and some of them are hands like hers. Davos stepped into the clean, cold air and tasted salt that did not hurt. In King's Landing, the proclamation went out at dawn with trumpets and hot wax. Joffrey Baratheon threw bread from a balcony with a look on his face that was halfway between disgust and delight, a boy playing king and finding the game more or less to his taste. Margaery stood 3 steps behind and 1 to the side. The trumpets made people feel as if they had an occasion instead of a necessity. This was good. Occasions are easier to sell than necessities. By noon, Tywin had set a date for a wedding that was not a wedding. A show of betrothal vows, a garland laid on a brow, a kiss on a hand. We must hold the reach with ribbons until chains can be forged, he said in council. Cersei did not argue in that room. She saved the argument for another, darker one where she could count on shadows to agree with her. Petyr departed that evening with Harrenhal in his pocket, and the veil like a cake he meant to cut carefully. Varys watched him go, and wrote a poem. Only he would ever read about men and castles and fire. Tyrion went to Sansa in a godswood that had very little god left in it. The weirwood did its best, chiseled by some mason long dead into a face that looked weary from pretending to be a tree. He told her what had been decided with as much dignity as one can bring to telling a girl you are to marry her for her land. He did not kneel, because kneeling would have turned it into farce. He did not stand over her, because that would have turned it into a conquest. He sat on a bench and let his feet not reach the ground and said, I am sorry. For what? Sansa asked, and found she meant it. For saving me from something worse? Or for making me your... What am I, my lord? I do not know the words anymore. Then? You will be my lady, he said. And I will be your... complication. He tried to smile, and it hurt. He let it hurt. I will not hurt you if I can help it. I will not command you if asking will do. I will not put hands on you unless you say my name with the manner one says a prayer not to be overheard. He looked away. I am not what you wanted. I may yet be less than what you deserve. But I am what you will have if you must have a Lannister. Nenachamo. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that a gull circled once, and the sound of the city went from iron to water to voices and back. I like the way you talk, she said at last, which was as near as a girl could come to yes, under a sky that had lately burned. It sounds like the truth when it can be afforded. They married fast and in silk. The bells tried to make it sweet and failed, and then tried again, and came near enough for custom. Joffrey played the petty tyrant on cue, and Tyrion bore it with the weariness of a man carrying a bucket that has sprung 3 leaks. Shae watched with eyes bright as a fox, and Varys stood behind a pillar and thought of the future's ankles, and where best to trip it. That evening, Margaery visited Sansa in a room that had once been assigned to a visiting lady from Old Town, and still smelled faintly of beeswax and lavender. She brought a loaf and a kiss to the forehead, which was both condescension and care, and neither if done properly. We keep breathing, she said. We do, Sansa said. He's not cruel. No, Margaery said softly. And that is something cities can be built upon. Cersei, meeting Margaery in a stare that had seen more whispered battles than any field, said conversationally, "You should have taken the older boy. You prefer kittens, but lions breed better stories." "I prefer peace that lasts," Margaery replied. "Kittens grow into cats. Some even keep their claws sheathed when stroked correctly." "You will be scratched," Cersei promised. "I advise you not to bleed where I can see it. It tempts me." "I bleed in kitchens," Margaery said sweetly. "It is more useful there." Time in the city did not heal. It layered. The smell of smoke lived in the stones, like a rumor you could not quite dislodge. The bread queues became shorter as habit set in. The watch took bribes less often. And then, seeing that their captains measured days by that ledger, less again. Loras rode patrols, not because a lord should, but because a lord must, when he has promised. He cut down 2 gold cloaks who had become wolves in the alley by moonlight, and later sat with the widow of one, and explained gently that this was what justice felt like at first, like a theft that later turned out to be a repayment. In the sept, the mother's lessons began. Boys and girls sat at benches with their legs swinging, and learned to make letters that would later tally grain and accounts and sins. Margaery visited sometimes, and set her hand atop a small hand, to guide it through a proper S and a vulgar one. And the children learned that the difference mattered. Olenna came once and scolded a septa for scolding, and then slipped the woman a purse. "The habit of gentleness is dear," she said. "You cannot ask men to buy it without paying something yourself." Joffrey sulked at being made to sit through councils where food was discussed. He enjoyed the drill yard and the kennel, and a new crossbow that threw bolts with an angry wasp's sound. Tywin tolerated his grandson's insolences as one tolerates a dog trained badly by another. He corrected the worst and ignored the rest, and threw meat in the form of minor cruelties, sanctioned in small rooms. Margaery saw it and learned a new path around fire. When Littlefinger returned in whisper and raven from the Vale, he sent a note that smelled of mountain air and sweetness, promising that old doors could be opened if one had the correct song. Olenna read it and snorted, and consigned it to the brazier. "Sing to Lysa," she advised the heir. "She will come running with a knife and a lullaby." Stannis' ships began to terrorize the coasts in pinprick raids that troubled merchants and soothed his sense of motion. Davos wrote letters that were brief and without poetry to lords who had learned to count their children before they counted their gods. Some wrote back. Not enough. He held to his king and his stubborn arithmetic. And in the night he sometimes woke with the green light in his eyes, like a disease that would not leave the blood. Word came in from the Riverlands. Robb Stark had married for love, which in a realm like this is often the same word as for trouble. The Freys muttered. The Tullys burned and mended. The Lannister levies moved like slow storms. Tywin received the news as a man receives rain on a day when he had planned a picnic. He adjusted the tablecloth and went on eating. When at last, the city had learned to cheer at the sight of Margaery's basket without panic in it, and to take orders from Loras without insisting on knowing what song his armor had been forged to, Tywin called a supper that was not a council and not a feast, something in between, which is to say a place where decisions could be greased without being recorded. Margaery sat between Cersei and Pycelle, and thought how odd it was that age could smell like mouse droppings and violets both. Joffrey made a jest that cut a serving boy's fingers, and laughed until he coughed. Tommen fed a bit of capon to a cat under the table, and beamed when it took the morsel without scratching. Olenna reached for a fig. "A year," she said to Tywin, soft enough that only the two nearest heard. "A year of bread and baskets and laws. Then we talk again of beds. If by then your boy has learned to say please to a child or a dog, we might talk of garlands. If not..." She smiled, and it was so kind. "We prune. It is what gardeners do." Tywin did not flinch. "We harvest," he said. "It is what lions do." Then let us see if we can teach each other agriculture, Olenna said cheerfully, and popped the fig into her mouth. Margaery slept lightly that night and dreamed of the arbor, and of a chain lying green-scaled at the bottom of a river, and of a boy with a cat. She woke before dawn and went to the square where the mother's bakery baked, and stood in the steam and thought of Renly and of a crown and of a no polished into a yes, and of the way a city can be held by the throat and soothed with a palm at once. She put her hands on the dough next to a woman whose daughter had been born the night the river burned. "Press, not pound," the woman coached. And Margaery laughed, and it sounded clean. On a spur of Dragonstone, Davos watched the sunrise attempt its ordinary business and fail to make the world simple. He thought of a king counting. He thought of a boy who might be bled. He thought of the letters he would write today and of the men who would crumple them and use them to light pipes. He did not feel despair. He felt like a man building a boat with driftwood and stubbornness. It would float. It might not reach a fine harbor. It would float. And in the Red Keep, in a small room where light fell across the floor in a band so bright you could see motes of dust enjoying themselves, Sansa put on a plain cloak and slipped into the day to carry loaves. The gold cloaks bowed and did not leer. A boy with a drum beat a rhythm that had found its way from fear into festivity. The bells, that great choir who had been trying for a tune for days and days, at last discovered a simple melody they could all hold, and they sang it, and the city answered with its own notes. Off-key, earnest, alive.